Welcome everyone, I'm T.D. Barnes. I was formerly with a special project for the CIA at Station D in Area 51. I worked in the brown building that you see on your screen, and what you see were my toys. Today's presentation is declassified. Today I'm going to discuss why the United States needed the U-2 and A-12 reconnaissance planes, and why the CIA was chosen over the United States Air Force for aerial reconnaissance, and why did it pick Area 51 in Nevada. The reason why we were in a Cold War with the Communist Soviet Union to stop the spread of communism. The Cold War becomes a proxy war in Korea. We were fighting the Soviet Union pilots dressed in their North Korean uniforms. The Soviet Union produced 23 aces during the Korean War. The United States feared a nuclear Pearl Harbor by the Soviet Union. Following World War II and the ensuing Cold War, the Soviet Union had fought a proxy war with the United States and Korea, and it sealed its borders. The Soviet Union boasted of having more bombers and missiles than the United States, and did appear to be winning the arms race with the United States. Russia had launched the first ICBM. It launched the Sputnik 1 into orbit. It launched the first man into space, the first woman into space, the first 3 cosmonauts into space, flew the first spacecraft to hit the moon, detonated a hydrogen bomb, and now he had developed a new advanced bomber. During ferret flights to see what the Soviet Union was up to behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union had downed more than 40 United States aircraft and killed 200 or more American air crews. President Eisenhower feared a military pilot getting shot down could spark a war, so to learn what the USSR was doing behind the Iron Curtain and sealed borders, the President chose the CIA over the United States Air Force to build a reconnaissance plane capable of overflying the Russian air defenses. The CIA contacted Kelly Johnson at Lockheed Skunk Works about designing such a plane, the U-2. The CIA's U-2 project Aquatone was more highly classified than the atomic bomb Manhattan project. Needing a place to flight test the plane and to train its pilots in secrecy, the CIA chose Nevada with a population of only 237,000 people, much of them supporting the West Coast line of defense that had moved to the state during World War II in fear of a Japanese invasion of the West Coast. The CIA chose Groom Lake because it was remote, well hidden from view, and provided security by being surrounded by the AEC, NASA, and the United States Air Force. This is the CIA's Watertown facility on Groom Lake for flight testing the U-2. Using the CIA gave the President plausible deniability. The CIA wanted to avoid all appearances of being military, so the flight test facility was never identified as a base. Everyone, including the military, worked for the CIA. However, less than 5% of the people participating ever knew the CIA was even involved. Everything was top secret, compartmentalized, and need to know. The cover story was that it was a NASA facility conducting high-altitude weather research. The existence of the facility was never secret. The secret was who was there and what they were doing. Here you see the mission planners, the metallurgists, the medical, the flight surgeons, mission briefers, and so forth were required to set up a mission. To maintain this secrecy, the CIA required everyone to live out of state and to commute to the facility on Monday morning and return home on Friday evening. The AEC's Mercury Base Camp provided services for those living at Area 51. Lockheed built the first U-2s at its Skunk Works in Burbank and then moved its operation to Oildale near Bakersfield. Lockheed transported the planes disassembled in C-124 to Watertown, where they were reassembled and then flown. Some of the pilots sheep-dipped into the CIA were Air Force F-84 pilots flying sampling flights through the atomic bomb clouds at the Nevada Atomic Proving Grounds. Almost every U-2 flight set a new world altitude record that they could never tell anyone because of the secrecy. In the early days, the pilots experienced hypoxia, numerous flameouts, pressure suit flying. There were no flight manuals or flight simulators. It was seat of the pants flying where the pilots learned to do this and don't do this during every flight. The U-2 was a low-G plane, delicate like a butterfly. Known as the coffin corner, the stall speed and the critical Mach number were within a few knots of each other. Fly the plane too fast and the plane broke up. Fly it too slow and it stalled and crashed. Some describe flight in the U-2 as 95% boredom and 5% pure terror. Note how the U-2 refused to land. Here you see the camera being unloaded from the U-2. The camera film was 6 inches wide and came in 250-pound, 10,500-foot rolls. You see the image's resolution that enabled the U-2 to debunk the Soviet claims of being ahead of the United States in various races. The Watertown facility was downwind of the atomic proving grounds, so all Watertown personnel had to wear dosimeters and film badges to measure their exposure to fallout from the atomic bomb test. Workers had to evacuate before each atomic bomb event. They would return a couple of weeks later, dust the fallout off their equipment, and go back to work. The Atomic Energy Commission Radiation Safety, RADSAFE officers would brief the Watertown personnel on their nuclear testing activities and radiation exposure. As the fallout cloud passed over the Watertown and into Utah, the Nevada Sheriff's Department would hold the traffic up on Highway 93 that passed through the state until the cloud had passed. As I mentioned earlier, the CIA used to cover that with the NASA High Altitude Weather Research Program. The CIA trained at 3 CIA detachments and 1 Air Force detachment. The CIA deployed overseas as a weather reconnaissance squadron. The cover story continued with CIA detachments deploying overseas to field bases A, B, and C. That would be Germany, Turkey, and Japan. The Groom Lake facility later became known as Station D. The CIA's U-2 program was almost ended in November 1955 when their commuter plane crashed on Mount Charleston. The C-54 Skymaster military air transport was maintaining radio silence when it crashed, carrying 14 United States Air Force, Lockheed, HICON, and CIA personnel en route from Burbank, California to CIA's Watertown U-2 facility in Nevada. The plane was flying in secrecy with its navigation disabled in a blinding early snowstorm. The strong crosswind caused the plane to drift off course. Here you see the sheriff-mounted posse, 2 U.S. Air Force colonels and members of the 42nd Air Rescue Squadron from Marsh Air Force Base, starting recovery operations at the Spring Mountain Ranger Station. Weather conditions were so bad it took 3 days to get to the crash site. Snow was so deep the riders hung on the horse's tail and they dragged them up the mountain. The recovery team had to wait for the recovery of the classified documents before they recovered the bodies. They carried the bodies off the mountain on the horseback. The trail was so narrow they had to break the frozen bodies to get down the mountain. From the start, the CIA didn't expect it would take the Russians over 18 months to be able to shoot down the U-2. Though it didn't happen quite that soon, it did happen to Gary Powers on May Day, 1960. Project Gusto was a 1958 DoD, Air Force, and CIA selection panel that selected the Lockheed-designed codenamed Oshkosh to replace the U-2. Here you see the former Watertown facility built up for the A-12 Project Oshkosh. The CIA Science and Technology Director called it Station D. Lockheed called this the Paradise Ranch. Now honestly, does this look like paradise? The fellow with the fish was our cook, Murphy Green. There's no telling where he got the fish. The CIA envisioned everyone working at the agency flight test facility living there and going into Las Vegas maybe 4 or 5 times a year. The agency furnished about anything anyone might need to make it their home. That didn't work out, so the agency was content with everyone living there during the week and going home on weekends. The CIA made every effort to keep everyone content. Ask anyone who ever worked at the CIA Groom Lake facility, and they will tell you that their time there was the highlight, the pinnacle of their career. Ask what they remember most, and they will say it was the excellent food served 24/7. Ask who was the most notable person that ever worked there, and they will say it was Murphy Green, their cook. The different groups didn't fraternize at the station because they need to know compartmentalization. Each group had a house that they converted into a bar and a place to play poker for their entertainment. Because my group was so compartmentalized, with team members working on different projects with different customers, those lacking in need to know couldn't even come into my building. It was the same way with CIA Radio Shack. From day one, the CIA facility was intended as a power projection operation, the nucleus for global operations. We had special fuel farms and security facilities throughout the United States, Okinawa, Greenland, Turkey, everywhere that the secret blackbirds might have to sit down in an emergency. This is where my special projects team worked. We had about every radar known to man at the time. Remember, we didn't have computers yet. We were developing stealth and building revolutionary planes using slide rules. This is my Nike radar they used in the Army at Fort Bliss. We brought it to Area 51 for our primary tracking needs. All the other radars gained to the Nike and tracked whatever it was tracking. This radar did most of our radar cross-section collection. Here you see some of my equipment, the mission control rooms, data collection and storage. During the U-2 program and a project codenamed Rainbow, the CIA experimented with making the U-2 stealthy to avoid detection by the Soviet air defenses. Called trapeze, they strung wires outside the fuselage to deflect the radar signals. That didn't work, so they tried an absorbent wallpaper glued to the fuselage. The wallpaper caused the plane to overheat, causing one of them to crash and kill a Lockheed test pilot. This is the radar cross-section pattern that we got off of a Soviet MiG-21 at Area 51 during Project Half Donut. As you can see, as we developed stealth technology, we put just about everything we get our hands on the pylon. We call it the pole. The pylon you see here was two battleship drive shafts welded together. See the shadow? Whenever the Russians overflew Area 51 with infrared satellite, we call them ash cans, we had to take the plane down and hide it in a hangar, not realizing until much later that the Russians knew we had the plane because the satellite picked up the shadow where the shadow had been. We developed stealth technology. We tried many configurations for our radar cross-section evaluations. The CIA produced the A-12 as the world's first stealth-design plane. The CIA Science and Technology Director continued pioneering stealth with drones and proof-of-concept platforms that advanced the United States to where it is today. Here you see my Beatty radar site when I was on the NASA High Range before going to Area 51. Here we supported and tracked the X-15, the SB-70, the lifting bodies that became the space shuttle, the lunar lander that went to the moon, the YF-12, and on request by the CIA, the A-12 at Area 51. My SRC 584 radar was identical to those that the United States provided Russia. Anytime the CIA flew its secret A-12 aircraft, it flew black without filing a flight clearance. The FAA and the U.S. Air Defense Command representing stationed at the Area 51 and even NORAD identified the respective radar sites of the flight with instruction to not report or to record it. Whenever the A-12, YF-12, or the M-21D-21 aircraft flew out of Area 51, an Air Defense Command ADC officer assigned to Area 51 notified NORAD, a federal aviation agency, FAA representative at Area 51, but likewise alert all the regional airport radar operations, Las Vegas, LA, Salt Lake City, and so forth. You can see on the map the number of radar sites that NORAD might have to notify during a Mach 3, 4 to 6 hour flight. Even while we were building the A-12, the CIA learned that the Russians had a new radar called the Tall King. This is what got me involved with the CIA while I was still in the Army at Fort Bliss, Texas. They moved one of the radars into Cuba, and we need to know whether it'd be able to track the plane in time to shoot it down. So we flew a ghost plane out of Biggs Air Force Base toward Cuba to evaluate the capability of the Tall King radar. Everything changed when Project Palladium determined that the Russians would soon be able to track the A-12 with the new Tall King radar and shoot it down. We planned to fly an A-12 mission from Area 51 to overfly Russia to probe the radar's early detection capability. Instead, we reverse engineered the Soviet Tall King radar, producing a single array of 4 Yagi antennas named Kathy, Kay, Mary, and Susan to simulate the Soviet-style integrated air defense system. The A-12 flew supersonic at Mach 3, 2,200 miles per hour. That's faster than a rifle bullet, and up to 90,000 feet. It got very hot, over 1,100 degrees, so we had to invent its fuel, its hydraulic fluids, just about everything. It had 2 Pratt & Whitney engines, each putting out more power than the Queen Mary cruise ship. It carried 80,000 pounds of fuel, so it had to take off with a partial load to prevent blowing out its tires. It would immediately hook up with a tanker to top off its load. On your flight, it might have to refuel 2 or 3 times. We flew 2,800 secret flights out of Area 51 without anyone knowing. The CIA chose and sheep-dipped 14 Air Force pilots into the CIA to fly the A-12. Though the Air Force chose its best pilots, only 1 out of 4 met the CIA criteria. They had to be 25 to 40 years old, weigh under 6 foot tall, and not over 175 pounds. The CIA's A-12 produced 3 variants: the YF-12 interceptor, the M-21 mothership for the D-21 drone, and the SR-71. The CIA modified 2 of its A-12s into the M-21. It was designed to carry the D-21 drone to fly over China to evaluate their atomic activities. During one of our drone flights, the drone had an unstart and crashed back into the mothership, destroying it. The 2 crew members survived the breakup of the plane, but the backseater drowned in the Pacific Ocean. Following the death of the backseater, the CIA decided to give its pilots water survival training. The U.S. Coast Guard at Lake Mead used their whaler boats to tow the pilots up in a parasail, and then they released them and dropped them into the water. The wind got up, and a couple of the pilots almost drowned, so we had to knock it off. The YF-12 project was 3 modified A-12s to produce a Mach 3 interceptor for the United States Air Force to intercept new Soviet supersonic bombers long before they could reach the United States. Basically, we modified the A-12's nose by removing the chimes to accommodate the used fire control radar and added a second cockpit for a second crew member to operate the fire control radar for the air-to-air missile system. It carried 3 air-to-air missiles. By the time the Air Force completed its YF-12 missile test, the Secretary of Defense had decided to kill the Mach 3 interceptor program. The Air Force and CIA turned the YF-12s over to the NASA to research the thermodynamics, special fluids, fuel, manufacturing challenges involved in the SST supersonic transport program and their respective titanium-built SR and A-12 programs. NASA modified these pressure suits for the A-12 pilots. Mach 3 flight generated heat that required us to invent just about everything for the Blackbirds: the fuel, the hydraulic fluids. The YF-12 flight test included propulsion studies, investigation of flight path oscillations, studies of the plane's loads and handling capabilities, and performance tests that involved flights with the ventral fin removed. Other research included the use of attached vanes to investigate airflow and wind gust, studies of the jet wake dispersion, engine stalls. One of the major areas of research in the YF-12 program was thermodynamics, the study of heat generated by high speed and what effects it had on aircraft structures and performance. These coarse lamps reached 3,000 degrees. There were 2 categories working at Area 51. Permanent party was the agency, the Air Force support contractors, and support such as security and housing. They lived in Las Vegas and commuted by plane to Area 51 on Monday and returned home on Friday evening. Support personnel were commuted from out of state as their function required. They might be at the area 1 day, a week, or even a month, depending on why their employer sent them there. The families did not know where we worked or what we did. My wife found out in 2009. All projects were compartmentalized, with access limited to only those with a valid need to know. This included CIA and special projects personnel who often worked on separate classified projects that they could not share with each other. Less than 5%, including permanent party personnel, knew that the CIA was even involved. Workers often had both AECQ and DoD top secret security clearances. During personnel selection, the CIA looked at the individual's family for compatibility, disqualifying the individual for any anomaly that could affect the project's security. Most families had something in common: boats on Lake Mead or cabins on Mount Charleston. President Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, they hated the CIA and wanted them out of the reconnaissance business. However, they desperately needed some reconnaissance over Vietnam, and the SR-71s were not ready yet. So they deployed 3 A-12s to Okinawa to fly 26 missions over Southeast Asia, and 3 missions over North Korea during the Pueblo crisis. In March 1968, the SR-71 arrived in Trinidad to replace the A-12. The A-12 flew its last operational mission in May of 1968, returned to Area 51, where the fleet was retired in June 1968 in classified storage at Palmdale, California. Note the comparison between the A-12 and the SR-71. The SR-71 holds the official speed record for the piloted operational jet aircraft of 2,193 miles per hour, set on July 28, 1976, and claims to have broken the world record, an absolute altitude record of 85,069 feet. The then top-secret A-12 had already set a documented maximum speed at altitude of 2,208 miles per hour at 90,000 feet, set during the test in 1965. CIA was out of the reconnaissance business at Area 51 when members of the intelligence board arrived as new customers, bringing with them a MiG-21 fish bed that they wanted to exploit, using the CIA's facilities and special projects team. An Iraqi had defected to Israel with a MiG-21 that we tested for Area 51. This was the mystery plane that the United States thought was responsible for the horrific 9-1 loss of planes and flight crews in the Vietnam War. During the technical phase, we tore down the plane to evaluate how the Soviets built it, their technology. We then flew the plane against everything in the United States Air Force and Navy inventory. On the first simulated air battle, the MiG-21 got a 100% kill against both the Air Force and the Navy pilots. Project Half Donut proved it was not the Soviet planes that were causing the losses. American aviators needed training. If they survived their first 10 air combat battles, they would most likely survive the war. The results of Project Half Donut inspired the U.S. Navy to initiate the Top Gun weapons school and the Air Force to exercise Red Flag to give their aircrews their 10 missions in Nevada rather than the war zone. My group had 2 control rooms. While we conducted a measure for one customer, another prepared for their turn at the MiG. General Doug Nelson once said that Area 51 was the finest gentleman's flying club in the world. The images flashing on your screen will give you a brief overview of what the Tactical Air Command, the SAC, and the Navy flew against the MiG-21 at Area 51. In almost every case, the air crew thought it was flying over the Nellis Air Force Base and never knew it was flying over Area 51. A few months later, we acquired 2 Soviet MiG-17s that 2 Syrian pilots, thinking they were landing in Lebanon, landed on an Israeli airstrip. Again, we had conducted technical and tactical evaluations, and again, we got a 100% kill against both the U.S. Air Force and the Navy. Without going into detail, the images you see flashing on your screen will give you an idea of the sorts of tests that we run, the planes what we flew against. Again, the Air Force and Navy pilots flying against the MiG-17s never knew that they were flying over Area 51. I might mention that a major difference between an Air Force operation and the CIA, such as Area 51, is we didn't have a chain of command. This made it much easier to keep a secret. We enjoyed the gunnery part. That was a lot of fun. We completely tore up an old bulldozer out in the desert. Back to the subject of chain of command. You'll recall with the Red Eagles, Lieutenant General Bond pulled rank. He used to fly a MiG-23 before he retired. Normally he'd have to go through weeks of training because they were very precious. Anyway, he got scared, punched out of the plane, and ended up killing him and exposing the program. That wouldn't have happened at Area 51. You can imagine the fun we had to participate in watching these dogfights between the MiGs and just about everything in the United States Air Force and Navy's aerial inventory. The DIA and CIA shared the credit for bringing the enemy assets exploitation to Area 51, where I would imagine it continues today. Following what we did, for several years the Air Force had an entire squadron of MiGs at Tonopah Test Range. Though the CIA declassified this project, a lot of us don't like to talk about it even to this day because of the sensitivity of the technology we acquired. This CIA project was a rail-launched Raptor-like bird that powered by a converted lawnmower engine designed to fly between 300 and 1,000 feet and up to 3,000 miles on about 100 pounds of fuel, taking photographs uploaded to a U2 or the satellite. The CIA started the nation's stealth development with the U-2, as I discussed, continued with the Blackbirds and the M21 drone, the various technology demonstrators or proof-of-concept platforms, and then the two half-blue stealth prototypes for the F-117 bomber. Note that I said bomber. It was a cute little thing, so we gave it a fighter F-117 name. It didn't have any guns. It dropped bombs. It was a bomber. This is some of the proof of concept, or technology demonstrator platforms, as we call them, that we flew out at Area 51. Some became actual programs, and others we just flew them for the technology that we could acquire from them. Remember the bird with the lawnmower engine that I didn't want to talk about? Now it's a big bird. Can you imagine being a test pilot that actually flies the bird of prey? This will give you an idea of how much the Area 51 has grown since CIA was there. You can see here we paid a heavy price for what we accomplished. This didn't include the Air Force and the U-2. As you can imagine, crashing a top-secret A-12 was a big deal. Usually we announced it as an SR-71 flight, whose distance was known. The cover story for this crash site in Nevada was that it was the F-105. Note how we tried to retrieve every single piece. Whenever we crashed a classified craft out of Area 51, we buried it inside of Area 51 to protect our technology. As you can see here, the human cost at Area 51 was very high. And wrapping up, I'd like to emphasize that just about everything we did had to have a cover story. Nothing was as it seemed. According to the pilot's flight records, they never flew at Area 51, and they certainly didn't fly any U-2s or Blackbirds. Imagine the coordination it took to fly 2,850 missions in the A-12 out of Area 51 without even our own Air Force knowing about it, or having to notify NORAD anytime you made a flight. I described Area 51 as being a global operation. Just look at the Air Force commander's passport, see the amount of travel he did while a commander at Area 51. Note that he had both an Air Force and a civilian passport. You also notice that in China, he was using a pseudonym instead of his real name. You can only imagine what the CIA commander's passport looked like. This is a monument that some of us worked on for years to recognize the people that we lost at Area 51. We had to get it approved before Congress before we could mount it on Mount Charleston at the Visitor Center. The propeller you see is off the C-54 that crashed in 1955 and it's pointed directly at Area 51. This is a model that we mounted at the crash site of Walter Ray, a few miles outside of Area 51. It shows up on Google Maps. Note that Area 51 now has an official name, Tommy Airport. This is Area 51 today. Notice you don't see any activity on the outside. When I was there, anytime a Soviet satellite was coming over, anything that's showing on that tarmac or landing, we had to hide in a hoot and shoot shed to keep the satellite from seeing it. In 2009, the CIA director brought several of us and our families back to Langley for the dedication of the A-12. And this is when we finally tell our families where we'd worked and what we'd done at Area 51. I mentioned during the presentation the accomplishments of the CIA's U-2, A-12, MiG, and stealth programs, but I didn't tell many personal stories and sacrifices of the participants behind these accomplishments. I didn't discuss the turf war the CIA encountered with the military services, with the politicians, and even within the agency itself as it evolved into science and technology. I'll just summarize them all by saying that after the very first MiG exploitation program we did, we completely turned around the 91 aerial losses we were suffering in Vietnam. Because of the CIA and DIA's MiG projects at Area 51 and the follow-on Air Force Red Eagles and Red Hat MiG programs, there has been only one American plane lost in air-to-air combat since Vietnam. That was during Desert Storm when a Soviet MiG-25 shot down one of our F-18s. I cover all of this in my book. This concludes my presentation today. Be happy to answer any questions or engage in any debates on what we covered today. Thank you.